Hello everyone, good evening. I am Fahim and this is Group 5. We will be presenting the paper The Value of Measuring Trust in AI, a Socio-Technical System Perspective. We all know how much AI is supporting us in everyday decision making and in a whole variety of society impacting applications on daily basis. In present time, we cannot think about spend a day. We all know how much AI is supporting us in every decision making and a whole variety of society impacting applications on daily basis. In present time, we cannot think about spending a day without some kind of interaction with AI systems, whether it is small or a complex one. But are humans ready to fully trust AI to control almost everything in our day-to-day life? It's critical to build trust in these systems for the humans to not worry about it all the time and also for the system's appropriate use. What to expect in this presentation? In this paper, the writers focuses on the adoption and appropriate use of AI based on systems and why it is critical to build trust from the first phase of its design. They talk about limitations and attempts to discuss examples of empirical studies in XAI, in particular the challenges of attributing a meaning to the numerical value of trust in AI. They explored the socio-technical systems in this paper and proposes two distinct approaches to tackle the challenges through the lens of socio-technical systems. Multiple studies investigated the black box model and the ability to calibrate trust in it. The working hypothesis suggests that by providing adequate methods to increase understanding of machine learning models via explanations, trust in the models, their appropriate use, and adoption would follow. In contrast, an excess or lack of trust may result in the misuse, disuse, or abuse of the models. But the results of these studies have shown to be inconsistent. Users overtrust models or model explanations. Other times they distrust the whole AI, or additionally, some studies show mixed results as well. These inconsistencies hamper the progress and makes it difficult to deploy AI-based systems in practice. Recent research work tries to relate these inconsistencies to current empirical practices. First, terms have been introduced like calibrated trust, appropriate trust, reliance, actual trustworthiness to indicate trust, which resulted extensive theoretical discussion on what should trust mean in AI constructing. Secondly, the empirical setting is limited in which AI is measured. Limitations include simplified laboratory studies not incorporating risk factors of trust for supervisory roles focusing only on humans, behavioral measures that do not match self-reported results. Two distinct approaches are discussed in measuring trust in AI. The constructivist approach, which aims to measure trust in AI as the aggregation of trust levels in all interactions of the socio-technical systems, and the paradigm shifting approach, which suggests to refocus research efforts away from prior definition and measurements of trust in AI, and instead the paper proposes to consider trust enabling constructs such as explanations utility, critiquing, and team cognition, which may allow designers to evaluate and improve the overall quality of the interactions of a socio-technical system. Measuring trust in AI and assessing its value. Empirical measurement of trust. Current approaches. Despite the large interdisciplinary interest in trust in AI, there is still no consensus on a clear definition of the construct of trust in AI systems. The measurement of trust in AI and the relationship between different types of measures of it still remains an open research issue. Researchers uses a diverse selection of terminology and trust definitions like calibrated trust, contractual, warranted trust, appropriate trust, reliance, perceived trustworthiness, And this is just a few of the examples. A lack of uniform language makes it difficult to establish common ground and to ensure the field progression. The writers sheds light on that the experimental studies should follow the steps: 1. Statement of the problem, including hypothesis to test; 2. Selection of the response variables; and 3. Choice of factors, levels, and ranges. But many studies suggest they often fall short in fully explicating their hypothesis. One example is the running hypothesis on trust in AI. In summary, lack of consensus on the terminology used around trust in AI, limitations in experimental protocols of studies aiming to evaluate trust, including those pertaining the use of instruments to measure the construct, significantly affect current research on human-AI interactions. The value of giving trust in AI a value. AI collects only a few measurements of the construct for each participant in single-session experiments. Typically, each participant answers a questionnaire once per session, or a behavioral measure of trust in AI is collected at each step of a given sequence of cases. Then these measurements for each of the participants are aggregated at the level of each experimental condition by computing, for example, the mean of their distribution. There are two open challenges in this approach. The number of scale of the questionnaires can differ based on the context, and it is not possible to provide an interpretation of the different values for different scales and their differences beyond the comparison of their absolute values. The literature on computational trust and logic and trust in human-AI interactions offers a few examples of quantitative models of trust. Many examples propose to measure trust as a function of measurable quantities in the interactions, such as the number of plant resources or monitoring to be invested in it and the quantification of the trusted stakes, but none of the models have been tested yet. The belief that AI will maintain a functionality called contract deemed relevant in a given context has further fueled the interest in trust calibrations. However, the applicability of the calibration in empirical studies is conditional and may not always work fulfilling all the conditions. Finally, some might argue the trust experiments in AI are comparative. But the paper argues without an understanding of the values of the construct at the hand and a consistent measurement of the procedure, not even the understanding of the uncontrolled variations in each experimental conditions, let alone the comparison of different treatments or even experiments, can be possible.
Hello everyone, this is Asma Fariha and I will continue from here. In the previous empirical studies, we have seen laboratory settings are in very simplified model where humans are in only supervised role. They will undertake some sequence of tasks which are repetitive in nature and will analyze the outcome of machine learning models. There is no interaction with other stakeholders or with any other AI systems. Here the observations are this kind of approach will fail in representing the real world applications and analyzing the heterogeneous human AI interactions. This might be enough for very specific tasks such as data scientist debugging and validating AI, but cannot be applied for the real world scenarios. So the question is, how can we measure trust in AI? Here authors have suggested a change of perspective to consider AI as socio-technical systems. They have defined socio-technical systems as systems that depend on not only technical hardware but also human behavior and social institutions for their proper functioning. Social institutions are rules of interactions between human and systems. By definition, socio-technical systems are multiple stakeholder systems, including engineer, owner, and customer. This stakeholder will interact with AI to achieve their goal through system interface and following rules which are defined as system social institution. So to define AI as a socio-technical system, we need to specify the stakeholders of the systems and the interactions the stakeholder will be having with AI, maintaining the set of rules for interaction, which we already defined as social institution. This method is not yet adopted to measure the trust in AI, but this now we will take one specific example of AI system, that is healthcare AI system. This is a medical AI system deployed in orthopedic clinic. The purpose of this system is to predict small fractures in radiographs. In reality, these medical images are very hard to detect, and AI can help the clinicians in timely identification of the fracture and proper medication. Here, human stakeholders are patients, orthopedicians, data engineers, data scientists, and forensic pathologists. The human AI interactions in these systems are validation of images, validation of AI outcomes and performance, discussion on image and the diagnosis outcome of AI. Finally, the treatment. The first method is named as constructivities approach. This approach model trust at the system level of AI. It aggregates all relevant interactions related to AI and then specify constructivities procedure to measure the trust regarding all the interactions. In doing so, the designer need to follow these steps. First step is specification of elements, that is technical artifacts and requirements, stakeholders, their roles and activities, social institutions. Next, defining interactions of stakeholders with AI and which are relevant for trust measurement. Next, we need to define the system dynamics over time t. After defining all these elements, then we have to measure the trust for each interaction over each time t. Then we can compute the value of trust at each time t for all the interactions, aggregating all the values with weighted mean. And finally, we can compute social technical trust value aggregating all dynamics. The steps are shown in the diagram.
So there are different ways we're going to be looking at it. So the different types of trust in human AI interactions. And we're going to be looking at this from a socio-technical system perspective. So empirical studies are aiming to measure trust in human AI interactions, often considered simplified laboratory setting to create human and machine interaction. And this is a perspective in which how trust in AI should be related to real-world situation where human agents and AI interacts. So that comprises of social institutions, human behavior, hardware, and this makes up the real-world perspective of AI interactions. Trust enablement, approach to the definition and measurement of trust. There is also a lack of justification for the AI trust measurement. And endorsing this paradigm shifting approach aims to empower users by creating the condition for letting them interact with AI in real-world applications at their best. There is also a couple of arguments that strives for this pragmatic goal, which may be related to what is commonly described as trust in AI. And this has some key expectation, of which one of them is a precise definition, and the other is multidimensional and context-specific measurement. Operationalization of proposed trust enablement paradigm for AI system. This remains, to the best of our knowledge, an open research challenge, which is a gray area. One way to introduce construct for trust enablement is to focus on the elements in each iterations within the socio-technical system that allows for improved understanding, learning, or critical assessment of AIs and their outcomes in a singular or multi-user context. Real-world interaction with AIs. So to this end, as real-world interaction with AI is becoming increasingly interactive, some novel technique such as critiquing may help improve the interactions and present a measurable construct for trust enablement in a socio-technical system. And also, critiquing may enable the interactive recourse against an AI outcome, such as the prediction of small fractions through the exchange of information with the system and the implementation of user feedback. So take, for example, a patient may critique the diaclinical AI by challenging their prediction of scaffold break on the basis of absence of pain and swelling in their hands. So here is our conclusion with some outcomes. We have shown that the existing approach to the definition and measurement of trust in AI are affected by things such as limitation that in particular its use to inform the design of real-world application. And our resolution is that as a first attempt to tackle this challenge, we propose to consider AI as through the lens of socio-technical system, and also to embrace the complexity of all possible interactions that human may have with AI. That is measure trust in AI in socio-technical perspective, and also to focus on more pragmatic and better defined construct that will enable trust in AI. To this conclusion, this proposal will support empirical researchers in reevaluating the current focus on trust in AI, and also reduce the distance between what empirical research paradigm may have and the expectation of real-world human interactions. So here's our future work. It's a functionalist perspective on trust and trustworthiness in artificial intelligence. So with that, we have reached to the end of our presentation, and we are more than happy to take questions. Thank you.